nationhood. All right, now anti-colonialism. You see that word anti-colonialism in big red print. The people who were conquered by Europeans became very resentful of Europeans after a while, and they began to push for getting rid of Europeans. Now, I'm going to take a long story short. They eventually found that Europeans were weakened by World War I, and then after World War II, especially, Europeans were weakened, and they were able to throw off the yoke of the Europeans. But that's jumping into the story a little bit. But they started by preaching among themselves that they should be independent, that they should not be under European overlords, that Christianity had some features about it that was contrary to their culture and their ways. And they began to resist the European overlords. Now, the most famous resistor was Gandhi, whom we'll talk about in a later chapter. Gandhi was not around in this chapter. But these people began to do things like rebel against their overlords, assassinate the Europeans, in short, put Europeans to terror and to fright, and stir up all kinds of trouble against these foreigners who have come in and taken over our country, basically referring to Europeans. The colonial people, the people who were conquered, the conquered peoples, in both Africa and Asia. All right, if you, I have to repeat a little bit what I said to the other class. The theme of this chapter, chapter 21, is imperialism, and it's talking about European and, to a lesser extent, American, but European conquest of Africa and Asia. And almost every African nation was conquered. The one exception, the two exceptions being Ethiopia and Liberia. But the other African nations were all conquered by European countries. And most of the far eastern countries were conquered. There are a couple of exceptions. Japan was not. China was not. But there were a let's see, there was another one in there, and if I can find the map. Let's see, the African map is on page 621. It showed which nations were conquered there. And then about the Asian countries. Oh yeah, here's the map on page 616 about the Asian countries. Thailand was the one, we have one country that was not conquered. But Burma was conquered, Vietnam conquered, what is today Indonesia, they were conquered, and the Philippines were conquered. Thailand was not. The reason for Thailand remaining unconquered was the Thai king had two kings in a row, father and son, who greatly encouraged westernization, welcomed the Westerners in, and convinced the Westerners he was trying to westernize his country, and as a result, the Western countries left him alone. Yeah.
Possibly in the textbook, because they prefer to transfer that Thailand to a buffer state. What is a buffer state?
Thailand is today, I believe it's modern Myanmar.
In page 610.
616?
610. 610.
Oh, 610. Let me look there.
Thailand escaped more convenient to transform the country into a buffer state.
Wait a minute.
What is a buffer state?
Only Japan managed to avoid,
Before
let's
Japan.
see, and then up
Yeah.
above that. Oh, Thailand escaped subjugation because officials in London and Paris found it more convenient to transform the country into a buffer state and to fight over it. Well, that's their reason to give them. Yeah, that's their reason. There is another reason given elsewhere in the same chapter that Thailand was more Western than a lot of the other countries also. But yeah, the French and British used it as a buffer. Britain and France, that had been enemies for generations, finally got together and agreed to conquer a lot of these less fortunate countries. On page 630, resistance. No, basically these people began, your book spends 2 pages all about the resistance, but these people began to rebel against their European overlords and resist, and this resistance was to eventually lead to their independence. Then your book spends about another page or two, to another page talking about the balance sheet. In other words, how good was imperialism? What good did it do for the people who were imperialized? And again, it's like this equation to put on a board. There were ways where the European intervention benefited these people. In other ways, it harmed them. And again, the balance sheet, we can't say that these people would have been better off if the Europeans had never come. Now, if your opinion is that these people would have been better off if the Europeans never come in, that's fine. But there are persons who have tried to take an objective look at it and say that Europeans perhaps intended well. But again, your book talked about irreconcilable views. The one view that imperialism was very harmful, did nothing but harm. The other view that your imperialism was beneficial. 2 irreconcilable views. Where does the truth lie? Your chapter contends that the truth lies in between. Neither extreme is justified. Imperialism had its pros and had its cons. It did introduce these people to new technology that they otherwise might not have been introduced to. All right, with that in mind, we'll end chapter 21. Yes, go on to chapter 22.
Oh, just a couple of things. So the beginning of the chapter, we don't have to worry about it.
No, wait, no, please. The beginning of the chapter you'll find on iCollege. The lecture I gave to the other class yesterday. I mean, I'm teaching another class the same stuff. And because of the snow trouble we had, and I got permission, it turns out that this is what they want us all to do. I'm staggering lecture. What I'm giving to you, I don't give to them. And what I'm giving to them, I don't give. You're expected to go to iCollege and get yesterday, it'll be dated 2/26.
Okay.
That's where you'll get yesterday's lecture, where I spend about 50 minutes or more talking about imperialism, actually more like 60 minutes talking about imperialism. You're expected to know the stuff that I give on it. Are we clear?
So,
Yes.
So from now on, we're going to be doing this?
Until I feel like I'm up to where the syllabus says we should be, which will probably be sometime after spring break, which is week after next. Once I get caught up, I'll start making this a face-to-face class again. It was designed to be. I know you did not sign up for a hybrid course, but again, we have these things called circumstances beyond our control. So, you are responsible for the beginning of the chapter.
Okay.
It's on iCollege.
Are you just recording those?
I'm recording, and I'm recording yours. And they are responsible to come to get the lecture I give you. They're responsible to get that from you. Is that hard to understand? I'm staggering.
No, because like for 18 and 20, we started that. And
Yeah,
you
18 and
also
20. Then the snow
made,
came.
Yeah, and you also made a like outline of what we needed to know, like the study guide. So
I made it
asking-
6 years ago. No, 10 years ago. Wait. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I made it up 10 years ago and then quit using it when it cost me a job at another college. Yes.
This is just a comment on it.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, comment.
I just feel like whatever the reason they felt that they were conquering everybody, they could have brought in the information or whatever that they were trying to do and still let the people decide, these peoples of other nations decide whether or not they wanted them to take over to that extent or not. But to come in and to bully people and say, you're going to do it our way or no way, I don't see how you justify
Okay,
how
yeah.
you
Listen, you
justify
have brought
that.
up an extremely good point, and I'm really glad you brought it up. All right, here's the thing about conquest, folks, and this is something I'm going to have to repeat what I said yesterday, but I'm going to repeat it here also. In the last 100 years, imperialism has gotten a really bad name. But if you look back through history, up until about 1920, nobody thought anything wrong about conquering other people. Alexander the Great conquered, and then going on back, the Sumerians conquered, the Babylonians conquered, Assyria conquered, Egypt conquered, and Israel conquered. every strong nation was conquered the weak, and it was looked on as being, hey, this is the norm, this is the natural order thing, and it's even called the virtue of conquest. Now, I mean, I know you think that, oh, it's so evil. We look on it, we're conditioned to think of it that way today. In my lifetime, there's only been one real nation to try to conquer. Saddam Hussein went in and conquered Kuwait, and he brought the whole world down on him. The Western nations particularly sent their armies in, their navies and air force, and drove Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And then President Bush said there's a new world order, a new world where that people are not allowed to conquer anymore. But conquest was looked on as being a virtue, a right. And what was so great about it, well, and I wanted to use, again, this is all repeat from yesterday's lecture, but I'm going to say it again anyway. The Chinese example. If you had lived in China 2,000, 1,000, 1,500 years ago, you'd have run a risk that Mongols were going to come in, take your children away and your wives or spouses, and carry them off as slaves. How do you deal with people like that? The Chinese dealt with them partly by building a Great Wall, but another way, you conquer them. The people you don't conquer will wind up conquering you. The Romans could not defeat the Germans. So what happened? The Germans came in and defeated the Romans. Now, folks, if you don't like what I'm saying, you can tell me you don't like it. I got something to tell you already. I don't like it either. It's